of person who wanted in that program, which were mostly local, mostly people who were local and could commute to the university. After that, I worked at Concordia University in Portland, where I was a research methodologist and sat on dissertation committees. And that program, at the time it closed down, was admitting hundreds of students each semester, and at the EDD or a doctoral level. And now I'm here at St. John's, where we have currently about 140 doctoral students, kind of in all different phases of our program. And that's including 36 that we're admitting starting in the fall. If Dr. Sampson joins us, he is currently a professor in literacy. He was a former dean at St. John's, as well as several other institutions that he served at in a variety of capacities. So he has a ton of experience. All right, before I get started, if you are following along, I would like you to jump on this Jamboard real quick. So you could just click on it. It should take you right to the Jamboard. I will do it so you can follow along. And if you need the link to be copied, Jessica or Sheila can copy that link. So I like to really just start out with getting to know a little bit about what you already know about jobs in higher ed. So if you could just jump on there, put a sticky note on. If you haven't used Jamboard before, it's pretty simple. You just come over here to this little sticky note, you click on it, you type in what you know already, put it in the K area. And then if you have any questions or things that you want to know about the job search process or about what types of jobs are out there, go ahead and put the sticky notes over here in the W. And then throughout the session, what I would encourage you to do is keep this open and jot things that you're noticing or learning along the way. So just kind of, plop them in there so we can kind of have a little bit of a record of where we're at. So, I mean, obviously I'm a teacher, so KWL is probably familiar to most of you, but it's a good way to kind of help give me some ideas of what you're looking to learn tonight. And Jessica and Sheila can kind of keep track of what's in the kind of what you want to know category, and maybe they can organize some questions for me, at our breaking points or stopping points as well. So I'm just going to give you about 4 or 5 minutes to jump in here and work on this. And looks like, Susan, you need access to the Jamboard. Is that right?
It says view only for me.
So that means I have to come here.
Yeah, me too. Says
Right.
view only.
So I will fix it right now. You should all have editing access soon. Once the powers that be. Thank you, Susan, for letting me know. All right, there we go. All right. Yes, you got the 3 big categories. Tons of community service, and service to the institution, and service to the profession, and service to humanity. I mean, they love to overload you with service.
Oh my God, this is ridiculous. Okay.
What did you do? What happened? One of the best things about academic jobs is that when you go in for their interviews, they often give you nice little fancy things like mugs that say St. John's or Georgia State or whatever other job you interview. A lot of mugs, a lot of little toys that they hand out. Mm-hmm. Welcome, Corey. It's good to see you. See you.
Hi, everybody. I just woke up, so hi. Sorry I'm late.
And what time is it?
It's about 6:30 in the morning, 6:45.
Bright and early.
Yeah.
So for those of you that just entered, we might need to repost or repaste some of these links, but I will let Sheila or Jessica do that one more time. I'm sharing with you kind of the presentation, and that presentation has some links to things like this Jamboard. So just right now, we're kind of brainstorming what we know and what we want to know about looking for jobs in higher ed. And the main goal of tonight is just to give some background to what the job search looks like, what types of jobs are out there, and then maybe a little bit of advice on what to do to prepare for those. So we'll focus mostly on faculty positions and faculty aligned positions. And there are several other places to look for jobs that I didn't post tonight for those of you that are interested in, say, international teaching posts or overseas teaching posts. There's quite a few out there as well, but I can email those to you if you want. All right, while you're still doing that, I'm going to go ahead and switch back and start presenting on some topics. And again, feel free to add in as many ideas as you want there. And Sheila and Jessica will follow up on any of the kind of questions or what we want to know when we have kind of our breaking points to make sure that I'm covering what you want. And Dr. Sampson is here now. So before I get started, Dr. Sampson, did you want to jump in and maybe introduce yourself briefly? I know you have a ton of experience, and so we want to use as much time as we can with you to get to know the job searching situation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Sampson. I'm a professor in the literacy program. My key areas are emergent literacy, early childhood. I write children's books, so I'm a writer. I also do a lot of academic work, and I look forward to talking to you tonight. I look forward to getting to know you throughout the program.
And Dr. Sampson will be doing what in the fall? Oh, okay. He'll circle back around, but he has some exciting work going on in the fall that he didn't mention. But all right. So before we get too deep into what types of jobs are out there, I just want to kind of do my best to make you aware of kind of how a job is sort of created in higher ed. There's a couple of different ways, but the most common way that jobs become available is when there's a vacancy. Obviously, if there's a new program or a new department, that usually means that new jobs are going to be created. But for the most part, the jobs that you are looking for are jobs that have recently been vacated by somebody. In order for that to happen, what usually this looks like is that you have a department, say it's a math department, and you have 15 faculty members in the math department. That means that there are 15 lines dedicated to that department. When somebody leaves, the faculty line is vacant. And what needs to happen is that the department chair has to formally ask the dean or the provost to fill this line. So they basically say, we have 15 lines, somebody left, we want to fill this line. And it is not guaranteed, especially these days, that that line is going to get filled. Oftentimes, just what's happening in higher ed policies is that if you have a line that's vacated, if you're broke and you don't have the money, sometimes the university is going to decide to not fill the line right now, but maybe hire an instructor who's temporary, or take those classes and add them as adjuncts or whatever. But for the most part, what takes place is there's a vacancy, the department chair formally requests the dean and provost to fill it, and then it goes up through the hierarchy to authorize a search for this particular position. Usually at this point, they decide what the rank is going to be for that position, the salary description, stuff like that, and then a budget that's created. Usually this takes a whole year, right? So if somebody leaves in, say, April, usually this process of requesting and authorizing takes place over the summer, and they actually start the search in the fall. Then they go through the hiring process and hire somebody, usually in the spring for the next fall. So it's almost a year that it takes in order to fill some of these positions. Sometimes that timeline can change, but for the most part, that's kind of the typical timeline. A search is usually formed with one person who's in the committee. That's the search chair, and usually there's about 4 members. Most of the time, they are coming from the department or program, but oftentimes they have somebody from outside that program who's sitting on there to kind of advise. Some of the considerations just to know about this process is that if there is an open, if there is a new department or new program, they can open new lines, but again, that's very difficult to do. Most of the time, the lines that we see pop up in the job search, in the search, search parameters are all lines that have recently been vacated. The deciding of ranks is something that's really interesting. A lot of time goes into trying to decide at what rank are we going to hire somebody into. If you lose a full professor, say somebody retires, you have to decide on whether or not you have enough leadership in a department to hire somebody at an assistant professor, right, to fill that line and kind of grow back an assistant professorship into a professorship. Or you can decide to maybe hire in or you can decide to maybe hire in somebody at higher rank. Sorry, there's some feedback coming in here, so I don't know who's muted. Okay, so when you decide these ranks, it can really, it really comes down to the deliberation of who do you need in your department. Do you need somebody more senior that brings leadership, maybe a big name, somebody that's going to draw new students? Or do you need somebody who's kind of new and can kind of grow with the department, brings in some new type of expertise? You often decide the hiring dates on this. Like I said, sometimes it takes almost an entire year to hire somebody in from the time it was vacated, a year and a half really. And you also decide on the search committee members. The search members are very important because they're the ones that are kind of giving that first level of interview and feedback about what type of candidate they want for a job. So while you might have, say, a dean that might write a job post for you, it's really going to come down to the committee members who are doing the work of trying to recruit the top candidates for that position. So the committee members play a large role in kind of setting the tone for who's going to be presented in the search process. So that's just a little bit of some of the background considerations. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in and I can walk through this a little bit more. In the search process, there are often several people that are involved. There's the search committee. The search chair is usually your main point of contact. Usually this is somebody that's a senior faculty member, an associate or senior professor in a department. You have the department chair who usually will weigh in on the hiring decision. So these two, the search committee and the department chair, have a lot of say in kind of who they're presenting to the dean as saying, we kind of want this person. Usually it's the dean that has the decision-making power for who is selected. And while they generally would defer to the recommendation of the committee and department chair, they don't have to. Oftentimes they might have a different vision or might go a slightly different direction than what the department chair or search committee would recommend. Again, the provost, being the kind of chief academic officer, is usually in charge of faculty. Usually, again, the provost is going to affirm the recommendation by the dean and fill that position, kind of write a contract, and everything's going to go through the provost's office. A few other key people are department secretary, who you would be in constant communication with if you advance through the hiring process, human resources, who of course go through all of the hiring process, for any job. The president of the university oftentimes has some, depending, especially if it's a smaller university, might have somewhat of a say in this process. And of course, the board of trustees ultimately are going to be the final decision makers for anything, especially when it comes to issues of tenure. There are several different types of faculty jobs in academia. So what I wanted to do is just talk through briefly some of the different types of institutions that are out there. And this might give you a better idea of when you're actually going through your searches and looking for different jobs, kind of what the different focuses are for each of these. It can be pretty overwhelming to see all of the different schools that are available, and you really want to make sure that you are tailoring yourself and tailoring your application for what that job is actually looking for. So generally, teaching universities are, or liberal arts universities, are schools that focus on teaching, right? They generally consider their faculty members to be teachers, and they usually will come with a 3-3 load or a 4-4 load. And what that means is that usually you're expected to teach 3 courses in the spring and 3 courses in the fall, or 4 courses in the spring and 4 courses in the fall. Most of these institutions are 4-year schools. They oftentimes have master's programs, and occasionally they'll have 1 or 2 doctoral programs that are also at the university, but they're not necessarily conducting a high amount of research. They're kind of focusing mostly on that teaching, and you'll see kind of a big emphasis on their undergraduate programs. In general, the expertise for these schools is semi-focused. So that means that when they're hiring somebody for their English department, they're expecting somebody to hold a doctoral degree in English or something very similar. But you might be teaching courses in rhetoric, you might be teaching courses in literature, you might be teaching courses kind of all along the spectrum of English, but you're still going to be semi-focused, right? You're going to kind of fit that print. Research universities, on the other hand, come in several different classifications. We talk about this as the Carnegie classifications. You'll hear things like R1 or Tier 1, R2, doctoral research, or even R3 sometimes. The focus here is going to be on research, especially if you're in a doctoral research institution. Maybe it's going to be mixed research and teaching. And usually here you have a 1-1 load. So if you're in the sciences and you're at like University of Chicago, for example, you're probably only going to be teaching 2 courses per year. 2-2 load, which is pretty typical of R1 or Research 1 in universities like the University of Illinois at Chicago, which is where I went to school, or 3-3 load. So St. John's is considered, I think it's considered a doctoral research university. So people are expected to produce research, but we also have a 3-3 teaching load. So teach 3 courses in the fall, 3 courses in the spring. Almost all of these schools are going to be doctoral granting, and they are very, the expertise is very focused. So in general, if you had a math department, you're going to want somebody that's teaching in applied mathematics, and that's kind of their focus. And you'll want somebody in theoretical mathematics, and that's going to be their focus. And it's going to be very highly specific. They kind of divvy up their programs and departments on expertise. Now, what that means is that if you lose somebody, say it's a literacy department and you lose somebody in critical literacy, you know you need expertise in critical literacy. So you're going to go and look for somebody in critical literacy. So whereas in the teaching universities, it tends to be a little bit more general, slightly less focused. In research universities, the expertise that they're looking for tends to be very highly focused. And that's probably going to be explained in your job posts. And you'll notice that in teaching university job posts, it might say, we want somebody who can teach this class and this class and this class and a whole bunch of different classes. In the research universities, you generally are looking for somebody who is much more targeted and much more much more focused in their expertise. Community colleges are, again, probably going to be focused on teaching. Those are 4-4 loads. They're 2 years transitional or have professional programs. Their expertise tends to be a little bit more general, but not always. Obviously, if you're hiring somebody for, biochemistry and you have 15 biochemistry classes to teach, you're going to hire a biochemist. But you also might just hire a bunch of general people with like biology degrees to teach a whole bunch of biology courses. And finally, we do have professional institutions which focus much more on professional apprenticeships. That expertise is usually done through qualifications. The load's going to vary. A lot of that is apprenticeship models. A lot of times you'll see that connected to a community college or as part of one of the other universities. There are different types of jobs in each of these different institutions. Most common, or I wouldn't say most common, but the ones that we generally talk about in higher ed are tenure track jobs. The qualifications for tenure track jobs are going to be based on teaching and or research. And your evaluation is going to be based on teaching and or research. Also service, as many of you noted, on the KWL. So teaching, research, service. These are usually annual appointments, and then they move to a lifetime appointment once you get tenure. And if you have any questions about that process, I have plenty. Dr. Sampson would be the one to talk about how to get and obtain tenure at different institutions. But they're all going to base it slightly differently depending on the type of institution you're in. If it's more focused on teaching, they're going to focus more on teaching and so on. Clinical faculty are lines that are going to be based more on your profession or your teaching. So they have clinical lines in medicine. Usually those are physicians that are overseeing somebody in the Department of Emergency Medicine, and they're going to teach residents. You have clinical faculty in education. Those are usually a reading specialist who's overseeing kind of a reading specialist class and has specific credentials. Their evaluation for their jobs are largely going to be based on teaching and their professional expertise. Usually, but not always, these start with annual appointments and then move to multi-year contracts. So they probably don't come with tenure as often, but it might be like after you go through a 1-year review, you start to get a 3-year contract. After you go through a couple 3-year contracts, maybe they put you into a 5-year contract. You still go through evaluations, but clinical faculty, you're probably going to be doing a lot more teaching, whereas tenure track faculty, depending on the school, you might have research responsibilities along with that. There tends to be in some schools, not to jade you too much, a little bit of tension between the two, which is unfortunate because they really should be working together. But there tends to be tension between the tenure track faculty and clinical faculty, partially because the tenure track faculty has added benefits like tenure. But again, not always the case, and it's better when that's not the case. Term faculties are going to generally be qualifications based on teaching or professional contributions. You're going to be evaluated based on your teaching or your professional contribution, and these are usually annual or set term contracts with no guarantee for renewal. We sometimes call those instructors or lecturers, and visiting faculty members would be another type of term faculty. You're there for a set amount of time. And then of course, adjunct faculty, which is usually based on expertise that's needed at a particular time. Usually you're teaching courses that you're contracted out to teach. They may be something that's like kind of with ongoing evaluation, or they may not. St. John's, for example, does have a process for promotion for adjunct faculty members. So we actually have adjunct instructors, adjunct assistant professors, adjunct associate professors, and then adjunct professors. So there is some type of kind of progression in terms of your relationship to the institution as a whole, which is not necessarily common, but something that I think is pretty neat at St. John's as we try to treat the adjunct faculty members well overall as an institution. So just so you know the ranks, and this is something to be important, or this is something that you want to pay attention to because it's important when you're looking for job posts. Generally, if something says that it's looking for an instructor or lecturer, usually this is not a tenure track job, although it could be. It may require a doctoral degree. And by the way, these terms are more specific to the United States. If you go to Europe, especially in England, a lot of these terms are very different. So the qualifications for the jobs are very different in different countries. But for the United States, the instructor or lecturer positions may require doctoral degrees, but oftentimes in smaller institutions, they don't. They might require expertise in the field. They might not. And they are usually annual contracts, occasionally multi-year contracts. The first real rank of kind of a professorship line is the assistant professor, which requires a terminal degree. Usually there's not a lot of experience required in the profession, or I think in education, it's pretty common to see somebody who has like 2 to 3 years of teaching experience in K-12 schools, but you're not going to see that throughout all assistant professorships. Most of the time, you're going to see somebody who's like just out with their PhD that's looking for a teaching job. These are going to be non-tenured, but often tenure track. So that means that they have to go through that process of obtaining tenure. Associate professors require usually 5 to 7 years of experience beyond an assistant professor. This can be somebody who is hired in as an associate professor, like myself. I was hired into St. John's as an associate professor after having had 5 years or 6 years of experience teaching prior to that. Or you can be promoted from assistant to associate. Usually when you're promoted, that comes with tenure. If you're hired in, it may or may not come with tenure. You usually have to apply for tenure at the institution that's granting you an associate professorship. So I came in as an associate professor, but I came in without tenure. So I have to go through the tenure process separately. This usually has more responsibilities for service, more leadership expectations in a department. And then full professor is usually 10 or more years. They tend to have a lot more governance responsibilities at full professor. They're usually the people that have the most kind of voting rights on different committees because they're the ones that are ultimately going to make decisions for who's going to be promoted to the different ranks. Now, all of this can be a lot of information, but what I would recommend is that when you're looking for job posts, pay attention to the rank that you're looking at. If a job says we're looking for an associate or full professor and you just graduated with your PhD last year, probably not going to be the position that you want to spend too much time applying for. If it says open rank, or if it says anything from assistant, associate, or full professor, it might be worth applying to, right? Because that might mean that they're really open to hiring somebody brand new if they fit what they're looking for, or they can hire somebody very senior. But again, this just gives you a little bit of the different ranks that you will see when you come to the job posts. All right, we're going to take a break in just a second to deal with some questions and stuff, but I want to just clarify that some of the other jobs in academia may or may not be similar to the search or to what I just kind of explained. A lot of administrative jobs will follow similar processes to the faculty lines. Assistant deanships, departmentships, or program leadership stuff. A lot of those are going to be fairly similar to faculty lines in the way that they are ranked and in the way that you would search for them. But there are a lot of other things that are out there, like research faculty jobs that you are hired in as research faculty, but you're not actually teaching. There's postdoctoral fellowships that you might be hired in, again, to do teaching and or research. It's kind of non-ranked, but it gives you some extra opportunities to build your resume or your vita. There's oftentimes things related to curriculum development and assessment, advising jobs, specialty jobs, consultancies, stuff like that. All of these are other jobs in academia that may or may not fall under the rankings and the systems I just mentioned, but you know, these are also things that you might see pop up in the job searches when you're looking for them. All right. All right, so far, I'm going to take just a brief moment to see if anybody has any questions, and then we'll jump into kind of searching for these. But so far, anything come up that you want to discuss further?
Hello, I want to ask a question. As an assistant professor, what are the requirements for he or she to be associate?
Good question. So usually what will happen is as an assistant professor, you often come in with very little experience. Maybe you have 1 or 2 publications, but people pretty much assume that you're new, and they will hire you into a tenured track position, kind of knowing that you're going to develop that research along the way. Or if it's a teaching institution, that you're going to do a whole lot of teaching. Usually to move into an associate professor position, you're going to have to kind of really think through what type of institution you're working at. If you're working at a teaching institution, they're going to care about your teaching evaluations. So they're going to care that you have 5 to 7 years of experience, that you have a really strong teaching record, Maybe you've created some really good classes. Students are giving great feedback. In addition, you probably published 1 or 2 articles, and they will probably move you towards promotion to associate professor. If you're in somewhere like St. John's, the recommendation that I was given when I started, and I started as associate, but because I wasn't tenured, they kind of gave me the tenure talk. What they kind of expect is that when you are hired in as an assistant professor, you're teaching for 5 to 7 years, and you're getting good teaching feedback, because it's still fairly heavily focused on the teaching. You also are expected to serve on university committees. Usually 3 or 4 committees is what they have you do per year from what I'm seeing. And then they kind of expect you to publish 1 or 2 things per year. Now that could include research articles that are peer reviewed. That could include book chapters, but they want to see that you have a record of publication along the way. If you get into research institutions, again, they require 5 to 7 years of experience at an assistant professor level. They aren't going to care quite as much about your teaching record. They will look, but they're not going to weigh it quite as heavily. They're going to be looking at research. And what they want to know is that you have a very strong research record of publishing, of working with graduate students to publish with them. They want to see that you've tried to obtain money through grants. If you got money through grants, they're going to be even more happy. But they expect by the time they move you into associate professor after 5 to 7 years that you have a substantial publishing record, that you have pursued grants. Dr. Sampson, is there anything else that you would?
I would say it's very much the university that you're teaching at, because I've seen everything. Typically, though, if you're going to be at a research one university, you're going to have 2 or 3 publications a year. And I'm talking about 12 to 15 when you go up for tenure. And you probably have to have some of those as single authorship and not just joint authorship. St. John's is sort of in the middle. When I became dean here, I moved the requirements from 6 to 12 for promotion to associate professor, because we have our doctoral programs. We have a doctorate in CNI. We have a doctorate in ed leadership. We have this in literacy. And so therefore, you really want your people to be experienced and leaders nationally. So when you go out to interview, if you're from St. John's, people are going to know the faculty from here, and he's probably going to open doors for you. So that's why we increase the publications. And quite frankly, I think that being a university professor, and you're getting a research degree because it's a PhD, you really are expected to add to the knowledge of the field and to publish these things in academic journals and eventually to write books and other materials and so forth. But you may also go to a small community college in East Tennessee or something like that, where, as Joe was sharing earlier, you may not have to have but 1 publication a year, or maybe not even that much. And so really you need to do your research when you apply for a job. Because there's a term that's been used for decades, and it's called publish or perish. What that means is if you don't publish, you're going to perish, you're not going to be promoted, and after 6 years, you'll simply lose your job. And so that's why you should go in eyes wide open and realize that there are going to be different demands depending on the university that you seek employment with.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. And then I have another interesting point. Just now you mentioned that the committees serve at the committees. So what kind of committees as leadership?
What kind of committees would you serve on as an assistant professor?
Yes.
Good question. So oftentimes they're going to put you onto department. It could be a department policy committee that you would serve on. There's standing committees at the university that everybody's expected to be a part of. That could be something like the assessment committee. It could be a university governance committee. A lot of our assistant professors, I think, are on to perhaps the school level committee that's about like the budget, or the technology committee, stuff like that. The kind of big premise here is that universities are supposed to be guided by faculty, right? Like there's supposed to be some type of faculty governance. Faculty like to have a say in what's going on. So a lot of committees are out there because faculty want to have a voice. And so we want to make sure that we we are kind of involved in that governance. Dr. Sampson, what are some other committees that assistant professors would be expected to serve on?
Well, there might be a curriculum committee for the college. You might serve on that. There might be a benevolence committee. You might serve on that. Generally, though, as assistant professor, the committees that you're assigned to are lower level, and they're more about doing things. There might be a scholarship committee where you review applicants for scholarships and help decide who gets them. And pretty much, if you look at a university webpage, you'll find the committees that are there. And
So it's like open positions for the faculty to apply for the, right?
Generally, your department chair, your leadership will appoint you to a committee. Some committees you have to be elected to, so it varies. For example, at St. John's, we have a very powerful faculty committee called the Personnel and Budget Committee. Okay, for example, Joe was talking earlier about searches. When someone applies for a job at St. John's, they're interviewed by this committee, and they're also interviewed by the faculty. They're also interviewed by the chair and the dean. And the dean ultimately decides, as you saw in the charts that Joe shared with you, but unless the P&B agree, the dean can't hire the person. So that's a very powerful committee. But in our case, you have to be tenured to serve on that committee. So for the first 6 years of your service, you're not going to be on a committee like that, but you're going to be more on committees that help run the college and department. It's more of a service that you're appointed to.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. Going back to publish or perish, when one is hired, is it clearly spelled out in the contract how many publications are needed per year, or is it an assumption based on the caliber of the university or the school?
Absolutely not. They do not put a firm number on there. You may have a conversation with your dean or your department chair, but what I always share with young faculty members is go for the maximum. Let's just say that you're at a East Wisconsin State University and they don't require very much, but what if you want to go somewhere else? If you go toward the lowest denominator, that's as high as you ever can go. And so actually my career started at East Texas State University, and they required about 6 publications, but I had 25 in 5 years because I really worked at it full time. So and as a young assistant professor, you must really realize that your job is not just teaching and serving on committees; it's doing research and publications, and it takes a lot of effort. And also, publishing's not easy. You may write an article that you think is very good, and you'll send it to a journal and they reject it. You'll send it to another journal and they reject it. One of my colleagues, Patricia Cunningham, who's got over 300 publications, she said, I usually send an article 4 or 5 places before it's published. And so that's a lot of work. It's a lot easier now than when I started because we had to mail everything in. Now it's all electronic. And so it's much, much easier to submit things. But they're not going to tell you exactly what it is. They're going to give you kind of a range. And I would always exceed what they hint toward that you need.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Thank you. So I want to ask one more question about that. 6 to 25 or something, that's a range, right? But I want to know, do you focus on the quality of the articles? For example, some article maybe is in the Q1, or some articles are in the Q2, 3, 4. So if somebody has 6 publications, so it means that those publications should be in the higher quarters. And then if somebody have more articles, so he or she can in the lower quarters or something, right?
Well, let me answer that question. There was actually a ranking of journals. You can look at different sites. AERA has a site that gives a ranking of journals. And so we call them tier 1 journals. And so if you're in a research 1 institution, that's where you want to publish. You can sometimes if I have an article and it's been rejected 4 or 5 times, I'll drop it down to a state journal. But the state journals don't count very much in terms of promotion, but they mean something. But once again, so you need to look at the level of the journal. Now you ask another interesting question, that is it the quality? Well, you can have, there are two types of quality. One is the quality or the ranking of the journal. For example, our top journal in reading or literacy is called the Reading Research Quarterly. 80% of the submissions are rejected, 20% make it. And so that's hard to get published in. But if you have an article published in RRQ, it really means a lot. The Journal of Teacher Education, the AACTE journal, is very highly respected, but hard to get published in. And so you have to have a high quality article, and you have to have it published in a high quality journal to get the maximum benefit toward promotion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll say one thing though, we actually strive during your program, we strive to at least twice for you to go through and write an article and submit it to a journal. So we actually mentor you on that. And I know in my class last semester, half the people, not last semester, but before COVID, half the people got their articles published. And so it really is a science in terms of how you do it. And it's a matter of looking at the journal you want to be published in and making sure your article looks like the articles that they publish. Otherwise, you're wasting your time.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Envy, I know you have a question, and then after that, we'll go through kind of a little bit more about searching for these jobs, and hopefully that'll help to clarify kind of what some jobs are looking for, and we'll talk more about how to parse these out, because I think this is a really important question about the types of publications and what we're looking for. But again, it varies, as Dr. Sampson said, so much depending on the institution that you are in and the one that you want to serve in. If you love community college and that's your passion, you keep doing research, but you're going to be so focused on teaching and developing initiatives at the community level, and that's what's going to matter, that you're not going to necessarily be spending as much time publishing in those top tier journals. You should, of course, but there's so many different institutions out there that it really varies. But always aim higher and publish more and publish in top tier journals. But Envy, go ahead.
Sorry, mine is a quick one. Sorry for taking the time, but I just wanted to find out when it comes to those publications, if you're applying, let's say I'm applying to a literacy department, I have had publications because, for instance, my background is special needs education, and I have publications in that area. It's education, but it's not literacy education. Are they going to consider me, or they'll expect me to have published under literacy education?
I'll briefly talk about this just a little bit, and if Dr. Sampson.
Sorry, if it's in your next coverage, just go to the presentations so you can save time.
Well, I think, but it's important, but I think, that'll become clear as we're talking a little bit about some of these things, because your job as an applicant is going to be narrating yourself to the committee to explain how you fit, right? That's not the committee's job to look at your publications and say, oh, she has all these you have to explain to that committee how they fit and why it's a benefit. So you have to be able to write this up in like your cover letter and your CV and all that stuff to be able to say, I have publications and have done research in gifted education. This is why it's important for your program, because it's related to literacy and so on. So in that way, they would definitely count. If you published perhaps in like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, science education, you're applying for literacy, it might be a little bit harder to make those connections, but you still can. You have to make the case though for why.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to jump in now to a little bit about how you search for these jobs in the first place, because there's like, where do you go? Most academic jobs are going to be posted between August and April. Job season, as a lot of us call it, because we're always on the job market. As a professor, you should probably consider yourself always on the market. Something comes along, you want to be open to it. That is going to be between August and November. That's when you're going to see most of those jobs posted. Here's a couple of different places just to show you kind of what types of positions are going to be posted nationally. And the cost. The reason that I put this up here is just to kind of explain that if you have a really major institution that has a lot of money set for recruiting, recruiting their faculty, what you will see is a fairly high amount of money being spent on several of these different places, right? $345, $435 is small chunk of change as far as the university is concerned. But what you will see is that for a lot of institutions, they're not going to spend all of this money for these different places, right? They're going to focus on just one or the other. So, you know, you want to make sure that when you're doing your searching, you're looking at multiple places, just because some of the smaller institutions are not going to necessarily publicize on every single website that there is. It does cost money for them to do so. Just to give you an idea of how I search for jobs, when I'm looking for a job, I am on the Chronicle, the Chronicle of Higher Ed and higher ed jobs almost daily. I get the notifications set for the parameters that I'm looking for. So if I'm looking at something in education, maybe I want to stay in Illinois, I look for Illinois, and I have those sent to my email. There's listservs that are part of like ILA, LRA, AERA, those things I'm paying attention to often. They're sending out jobs fairly frequently during job season. Specific institutions, I check usually when I'm stressed out and looking for jobs. I'm looking at, okay, let's look at the community college in Chicago, Malcolm X College, or let's look at DePaul University and see if they have any jobs available that maybe I didn't see on the board. So I'll look at specific institutions if I'm looking more narrowly. I don't really find ResearchGate and academia to be really good with the job stuff. It's usually redundant to the Chronicle, and of course, word of mouth stuff. Most of these are going to be national searches. If you're looking for a faculty job, almost all of them are going to be posted nationally, and most schools are going to be willing to recruit somebody nationally from anywhere in the country. The exception might be for clinical jobs. So those might not be posted on these websites. Like if you're looking, if St. John's is looking for somebody who's certified in reading in New York, and we need somebody who can oversee reading classes in New York, we want to hire somebody that is specific to New York, perhaps knows New York City, and we can kind of put into a clinical line or a term faculty line because they're going to be teaching, you know, certification courses. So there are some exceptions here where you're not going to see national searches, but almost all of the faculty lines are going to be posted nationally. Again, you can go through some of these notes later for me. It's just kind of what I think about each of these different jobs. Most of the time, if you're looking for something admin related, if it's going to be something at like the student development level, at like a dean level or assistant dean level or department director level, those you'll often find in very similar situations here, maybe higher ed jobs or Chronicle. But if they're non-academic, these jobs are not necessarily going to be posted nationally, right? So if you are looking for something in student services, maybe your research is in student services, and that's really where your heart and passion is, you know, you're going to be almost flipping this around and looking at other job search engines, things like Monster, Indeed, looking at word of mouth, looking at specific institutions, professional listservs. The Chronicle and higher ed, you might not see quite as many admin roles that are below the level of kind of dean or director. So if you are interested in starting out in something in higher ed, you might find yourself kind of looking in a different direction than the way we would search faculty positions. All right. I know we're running out a little bit of time, but I want you to, if you can, click on these links to go to a couple of
Dr. J, we have to 8. I extended the time.
to 8. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we have.
I think she has a question about if you can explain what a listserv is.
Sure. Yeah, I'll explain the listserv. While I'm doing that, go ahead and click on open these two web pages in your what is it called, browser. We're not going to do the breakout rooms, but we'll do an activity with these. A listserv is one of those really annoying things that you get from these organizations that kind of give a blast out to everybody, and it has a bunch of information that you're probably used to deleting. They used to be really ugly in the way that they were organized, and then somebody would go and push reply all, and it would respond to like 200 people. What a listserv essentially is the email list that an organization has to kind of blast out to everybody in that organization important information. Job posts come along with this. So you might have the Literacy Research Association that has an email list of everybody who wants to be involved in the listserv. and maybe once a week they kind of blast out a message to everybody and says, hey, there's 3 job posts that we have among our community in literacy education. 3 different professors told us about these different jobs, so apply when you're willing. So you would get on those by being part of professional organizations like LRA or ILA, or more specific organizations too. Dr. Sampson, do you have one for the Catholic education? Do you have a specific listserv for at AERA, or do you just use the general listserv? Okay, maybe I lost Dr. Sampson. Anyway, that would be what a listserv would look like.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I was just sharing with you that if you go to aera.net, that stands for the American Education Research Association. It is our highest level, highest ranking place to present research. And for example, in April of 2022, they're going to be in San Diego. And I'm actually chairing the SIG Special Interest Group on Catholic Education. And you have a pretty good chance, if you do something about Catholic education, since you're studying at a Catholic university now, that you would get on the program there, and that means a lot. And then when you're on the program, a lot of that research from the program can be published. And so, but they do have a listserv that points out different opportunities and job opportunities and so forth.
Yeah, and here, even here at aera.net, you have this
job board, yeah,
job board in the corner that will also have some stuff there. So you can see some of this stuff is like research scientists. So those aren't faculty jobs, but if it fits, I mean, it's something definitely worth looking into. And you could take a look at like view all. But this is another place. This isn't really a listserv; it's a job board though through one of the organizations. So these type of things I look at as well. All right, so what we're going to do is spend just a few minutes. These are 2 things that existed in literacy. Oh, great, this one's no longer active. Oh yeah, it's still there. All right, these are two different jobs that are posted currently. One in higher ed, both in higher ed jobs. They're also both in the Chronicle. I just selected these because it was easy to access them. It's a typical job post. It looks pretty much like most of them will, and they're both in literacy. So what I wanted us to do is take this, go back to the Jamboard. If you need the link, it'll be posted. And on page 2, what I would like you to do is start out, forget the groups up here. We'll just do this all together. I'm just going to give you 5 minutes to read briefly through one or both of these job posts and write about things that you notice that they're talking about. What are things that they are stating? What are some of the things that jump out at you? And then what are some things that you wonder? What are some things that that you're still curious about? Like, what does this mean in this job post, right? So let's look at kind of a real life activity here. Just click on one of these, and what are some of the things that you're noticing that they're posting in the job post? And then what are some of the things that you wonder? Maybe that's, what does this mean? What are they looking for? What application materials do they require? Stuff like that. And we'll do that for about 5 minutes, and then kind of discuss what are some of the different ways these job posts are written. So I notice and I wonder. And while you're doing that, I am going to just stop sharing for a moment so I can double check what's written on this other part. maybe about 2 more minutes. So some things that you notice about these jobs and some questions that maybe were prompted because of them. Okay, good. So, all right. So keep on posting some of those things, and I'm going to walk through one of these. As many of you are pointing out, there's usually something that explains a little bit about the institution. So SUNY Cortland talks a little bit about who they are, what they care about, what's important to them. These are usually kind of stock, kind of copy and paste from most positions at that institution, or at least within their particular college. Then they'll talk about usually the department or the program. And again, that's going to be something that generally is pretty formulated and would be used in perhaps multiple posts, although it's very possible that they could here kind of talk specifically about what they're looking for. So, they might specify something around like the early childhood education, if that's really what they're looking for. Here, they're kind of, it looks like very broad, basic, this is who we are, this is the type of department that we are. So that's important for you to think, first of all, is this even a job that you want? Do you want to, most of them, and this is surprising, they put their salary range. Most jobs don't put their salary range in there, but, and if they do, they definitely write it better than upper 50s. That's the first time I've ever seen that. So anyway, oh, go ahead.
I think they're doing that, Joe. I think they're doing that because they're saying we don't pay very well. I mean,
I was going to say they're not paying very well.
And they don't want to attract people who are going to ask for 80,000 when they can't do it. But it's a small Catholic college, and so I guess they're budget challenged.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like most of the time, like I said, they're not going to post it, but it's good that they do, because if they can't do 60 or if they can't do 70, I mean,
well, you can make 110,000 as a first grade teacher in New York City, so it's challenging.
So, and that's something to pay attention to. That this is not for this type of school. I don't really know much about SUNY Cortland. Upper 50s, mid 60s is kind of what you make as an assistant professor in smaller institutions. If you're in bigger institutions, possibly 70s and 80s, but you'll make more as kind of a long-term teacher in somewhere like New York for sure than you will as an assistant, possibly even associate professor.
And I want to say something about that, because you can't be short-sighted, because as with a PhD in literacy, you will be making a lot more than that when you get to year 10 in your career. For example, in my career, after I moved toward promotion and tenure, I started writing curriculum materials that paid me a lot of money. I wrote textbooks, and I made $40,000 or $50,000 per book. And then I wrote children's books that made a lot more. And so the PhD is a license to do a lot of different things that you can't do if you're a first grade teacher. And so that's why I made the move, and that potential is yours. Maybe later on I'll share with you some of the work I do that's outside the mainstream, and you'll see what opportunities are there. However, the first thing you have to do is get tenure, and then you have a license to do some other creative things.
Yeah, and that's a really good, that's an excellent point. Most of the money, the nice thing is with an academic job, you have your base salary. That's important, but that's not where it ends. It does take a long time to kind of work up, but once you start writing books, getting royalties, doing speaking engagements, curriculum design, consulting, you have the freedom to do that as, especially as a tenured faculty member. It's a really good job with a lot of flexibility that you don't get. But the initial base pay, if you're coming from a high-paying teaching job, expect to take that initial hit. But over time, you will get to a point where you are able to find other income streams, which is the benefit that you can do as a faculty member.
Is that why a lot of adjuncts I mean, a lot of people take multiple adjunct jobs?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about this in the Jamboard, so I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But yeah, the adjuncting gigs are, they are what they are. That's not the way to make money in academia. It's nice to get experience. It's good to do your passion. If you like teaching, it's good to build your CV. It's good to keep connected with the university. But you're talking about per class anywhere from $3,200 to $4,500, and that's without any guaranteed increase. So people usually do that on the side if you're if you are teaching and you want to do adjuncting on the side. It's because you really want to do it, not necessarily because you need the money. I adjunct at several institutions because I love teaching the topic, right? Or I'm helping friends out or whatever. But honestly, that's not the important thing. As an assistant professor or as an associate professor, you need to be publishing and working on some of these other things for tenure. And so you'd be better off not necessarily adjuncting extra if those are your responsibilities. But I'll talk about that in a few minutes. I know there's probably questions about, a lot of questions about adjuncting. Again, you have your major responsibilities here. And I noticed somebody said, oh, and then of course, we see that split out between teaching, service, and scholarship. And it'll give you the qualifications somewhere down here with the preferred qualifications. Generally, if there is a minimum qualification, it's not very negotiable. However, sometimes there's a little bit of freedom here. So evidence of scholarly activity is something that you're just going to have to explain and articulate. If you have publications, that's great. If you have written for grants, that's great. A dissertation here counts. They're looking for promise that you can do scholarship. Supervision or teaching experience related to literacy needs. Again, something that you have to figure out how to narrate yourself. So even though you might not have been, it's possible you might not have been a licensed teacher or a licensed supervisor. It's possible that this position might take somebody who has extensive experience in working with child development or working as a specialist or something. The preferred qualifications usually are a little bit more negotiable. Most literacy jobs are probably going to have some phrasing like at least 3 years of teaching experience. If this isn't the preferred qualification, I would say go ahead and apply if you don't have that, or if you only have 1 or 2 years. But if it's in the minimum qualifications, a lot of times they need somebody who's licensed in order to run their licensing classes. And so it's going to be a much harder sell if you don't have your own teaching license or clinical licenses. So you do want to pay attention to these things, but there are a lot of freedom in many of these jobs. And then, you could see where, oftentimes they'll give you the person to contact here who would be the search chair or the department secretary to connect for questions. But do you have other questions about kind of this job post? Because I know there are other questions that I want to make sure that we have time for. Let's see what there was over here. Consider outside the parameters, someone who teaches in an urban community college. So yeah, it's possible, right? Like for somebody who teaches in a community college, and if they're looking for somebody in K-12, especially if you're perhaps teaching, some of the reading classes or some of the writing classes, it's possible that you can make the case that they should consider you because you have experience teaching, especially if it was like a secondary position. You have experience teaching community college students. Again, it would come down to whether or not they need to see a license, which is going to help them with the state. The state might require the licensing.
There are other questions, Dr. J, on the first page.
Yes, yeah, I saw that. We're gonna go back in just a second here. It does seem like there is a lot of experience needed for somebody who wants to break into the field. But after you're done with the PhD, as Dr. Sampson said, you're going to have experience working on publications. You're going to have submitted stuff in the program. Your dissertation itself is a significant contribution, scientific contribution. So that qualifies you for all of those questions about scholarship. As far as service is concerned, Jessica and Sheila put all of this stuff together, right? Like they can write this in their service, in their CV under service, to the university. They put substantial work into putting on these workshops. That's something that they would want to highlight to show that they can do substantial service experience. So then it comes down to the teaching. If you are able to adjunct, even if you adjunct one class, being the teacher of record speaks a lot for somebody coming in as an assistant professor. So coming out of a PhD program, you will have the experience to qualify for these jobs. If they want somebody that has 3 to 5 years of teaching experience, that's again something that's more on the professional side that you have to kind of look at the jobs and see what they require. Most of the big schools, especially state schools, will accept international students. They will support visas, work visas. Some of the smaller schools don't necessarily have that capability, but many of the larger schools, definitely do. Adjunct positions, we'll talk about that because there was a lot of questions on the first slide. All right. So, Sheila, you want me to go over these questions now?
Yes, if you don't mind going over some of them.
All right, so basically in sum, what we've covered tonight were some of the basics of the job searching, where to find the jobs. Next week, what we're going to do is answer some of these questions about specifically what to include on your CV. I think there's a question here, how to write an engaging CV and cover letter. We're going to talk about that specifically next week. We'll do a little bit of workshopping. I think Dr. Sampson said he can come. Dr. Blake will be there. Dr. Gonzalez, who just graduated, will be there as well to share some of his work. If you want to kind of see some of my materials, I've linked those. I could probably share these with you. These are the materials that I used to apply for this particular job, which was associate professor rank, but you can see my application here for 2015 when I applied for a job in St. John's Literacy program, and you can kind of see my cover letter and my vita and what that looked like 1 or 2 years into my assistant professorship. So I did apply for St. John's way back then, ended up not finishing my interviews, which is embarrassing now that I work here. But you can kind of see how that developed over time.
Excuse me, would you please share your valuable information with us, such as these PDF files and the PowerPoint today?
Yes.
Yes, you can make sure you sign the attendance sheets and we can send out the information later.
Thank you.
So anyway, in there you'll see kind of where I was at as a beginning assistant professor 1 or 2 years in versus where I was 5 to 7 years in, right? Okay, adjunct jobs, my sense of adjunct jobs is if you can find some, they're great. Sometimes that means you're kind of emailing departments and just sending your CV in. I, in this particular job, get a lot of emails about, hey, I'm this type of person. I teach these type of classes. I would be really interested in teaching for your institution. It's obviously much easier if you have an in. However, with that being said, there are times where somebody sends me a CV and I look at it and I'm like, oh, this is somebody who's really interesting. I should, follow up with them. And if a teaching position, a class becomes available, we add them to the adjunct pool. there's a lot of stuff right now available in the higher ed jobs, as well as the Chronicle, about adjunct positions. And you'll also see that in specific institutions, right? So if you go to Teachers College, you look at their, like, you go through their HR website on jobs posted, oftentimes they will post that they need adjuncts for a particular program. And that can be really helpful to you know, apply for those, knowing that it's only going to be 1 or 2 classes, knowing it's not going to be a ton of money, but that it's going to get you the teaching experience you would need or you might want when you go into looking for full-time jobs. It's fine to look for adjuncting at multiple universities. Don't expect adjunct positions to turn into full-time positions. That's fairly rare because they do national searches. It's very difficult to take somebody who's already at your institution who is not tenure track, so either adjuncting or a term faculty, and to hire them into a tenure track line. They maybe would be more likely to hire you in a clinical line or a non-tenure track line, but don't expect that because you adjunct somewhere that you're going to be next in line for a professorship when it opens up. That isn't, it isn't the common path. It happens, especially at smaller institutions, but it isn't the common path. Adjuncts sometimes will have stuff already handed to them. Other times, as Susan knows, she was asked to kind of like, hey, good luck. Can you create this class for us? Right, Susan? I think you did some significant creation of the class that you taught in the spring.
It's fun. It helps you use all your creative, everything you've learned.
Yeah,
Put it all together.
Oh, look at that. Yes, she, you know, Susan had, I think we gave her a syllabus, and there was maybe, and I don't even know if you had the Canvas shell given to you, but you know, we talked about it and she asked if she could change some things on there, and she made the course her own because she was teaching it for a specific group of students kind of for the first time, and the first time asynchronously online, or was it synchronous? I can't remember. But yeah, sometimes you're given stuff that's already packaged. Sometimes you're asked to create your class on your own. Let's see. Okay, so to this question down here about is there inside process, like I said, there's usually not an inside process to move somebody from adjunct to an assistant professor. However, sometimes for clinical positions and so on, there are. I'm not seeing the chat, but I know people are typing things, so feel free to jump in and ask questions, or Sheila and Jessica, you can jump in and ask. Let's see, part-time opportunities and full-time position. Yeah, it's definitely doable to teach a class on the side. We have many of our adjuncts right now are full-time, you know, fully employed full-time instructors that just want to teach because they love teaching at the college level, at the university level. So that's definitely encouraged. And the type of research to start with, and how do I continue in the field of scientific research? Again, great question about what type of research you want to do, and that's going to depend on the type of institution that you're involved in. If you do quantitative research or if you do qualitative research, it doesn't necessarily matter too much, but you do want to keep in mind that the department that you move into is going to probably have some preferences. If you go into an ed psych department, ed psych is generally dominated by a lot of quantitative research. They're going to expect you to do a lot of papers that are statistics and come out pretty quickly. In an ed psych department, you might be publishing multiple quantitative studies a year, right? And so, you know, you would want to know that ahead of time and kind of be getting a head start on that, because you're going to need to hit the ground running in an ed psych department. A lot of literacy departments these days tend to be dominated by qualitative research. And so we already know that qualitative research oftentimes means that you're sitting in a classroom with students for a year doing research, and you're not going to be necessarily publishing, you know, as Dr. Sampson said, those like 5 articles right away, but we would expect that soon down the line once you collected that data to kind of ramp up, right? So you definitely want to kind of, know the different subfields of education, because they all have their different kind of preferences. You also want to know the people in a department. If you're applying to St. John's, for example, you can Google who we are, right? You know who we are. So when you're preparing for jobs, Google the people in that department, get to know what type of research they're doing, know who you're going to be talking to. You might not know the search committee, right? You might not know who's exactly on that search committee, but you know that most of them are probably going to come from that department. So you do the work when you're getting ready for an interview, or when you're writing your cover letter, or whatever it is, to do the research of what type of institution is this. If you're applying to St. John's, for example, in your cover letter, you better mention the Vincentian mission, right? Like, you have to be able to say that I appreciate St. John's commitment to social justice and the Vincentian mission, and my research relates to this, blah, 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 blah. If you don't do that, like, I can guarantee you that you're looking like every other candidate that's just, passing on a cover letter or a CV. If you're connecting yourself to the broader mission of the institution, then it looks thoughtful, and that's just good job application stuff. You don't necessarily need to cite people like Dr. Sampson in your cover letter, but it wouldn't hurt to make a nod to the stuff that Dr. Sampson is interested in, because chances are he's going to be reviewing your application. And so when he reads something in there that kind of stands out, he's going to, it's going to catch his eye. Doesn't mean that he's going to choose you over somebody else just because of that, but you do want to do your due research when you're looking at these institutions, and you can Google any of these institutions and find out who's teaching there. All right. So, Dr. Sampson, do you have anything to add to this, or did you want to? We have a few more minutes for questions. I'll stay on as long as people need me to, but
Well, I do. You need to look at
Dr. Sampson, I believe you have 8 minutes, so it's pretty good.
Okay, I won't talk for 8 minutes. The most important thing you do, and I've been at 5 universities, so I've been hired at 5 different universities, and I probably turned down 15 jobs. And the reason I was successful is I read the job announcement very carefully, and in my cover letter, I addressed everything they were looking for. Because what happens is some of these committees have a checklist. Does she or he meet this, and I want them to see overtly in my cover letter that I do this. And so, and I think that attention to detail is very important. So like Dr. Joe said, some people will send out 20 or 30 applications. And so I look for clues that they're really interested in my university, and the Vincentian mission hint that Dr. J mentioned is very, very important. Okay, that that they want this job. And the committee is going to be reading a lot of applications, but make yours stand out. And so I think that's very true.
Yeah, and we're going to go over this again next week when we talk about the CVs and cover letters. But Dr. Sampson just reminded me of something that I did. This was back in 2015 when I applied for St. John's job, right? It's a tenure track assistant professor in literacy and TESOL, right? So you can kind of see exactly what this looks like. And this is going to be in that folder that Sheila and Jessica will make sure that you have access to. Most of you know Dr. Ortlieb. This is, he's the one that, was overseeing this. I think, Dr. Sampson, you were dean at the time, probably?
That's correct. I actually have a PhD from the University of Arizona, and it was pretty rare in those days. And so I've always had the dream of making a new PhD program. And so when I came to St. John's, I created this program, but I hired Evan as the co-architect of it and wanted to deliver it and get it off the ground. And so we're very unique in that we're a brick and mortar institution that's highly respected, well known, but we're offering it to you online. When we started, the first concept was after a program I had when I was dean in Arizona, in Phoenix. We had a program where people had the program pretty much online, but they would come in at Christmas every 2 weeks. For 2 weeks in Arizona at Christmas, of course, it's warm and nice. Most people want to come. So we wanted to do the same thing here, but at the very end, I decided not to require that so we could have a worldwide audience. And we have people now in China, we have people in Japan, we have people in Italy, all that are PhD students. However, I do want to say for those of you that are in the tri-state area, we're going to be doing some events in Manhattan. so you can come face to face and see us. And maybe you're living in Texas and you want to fly to the Big Apple. So we're going to have those opportunities too. But in the program here, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to chat like we're doing right now. In my classes, you'll be posting something half the time, a 3-minute video, and you'll see people's video and respond back to them in video. So we're trying to make it as face to face and as friendly as we can. But that's a little bit about the architect of the program.
Yeah, and the reason and one part of the reason I pulled this up is because one of the things that interested me in St. John's initially back in 2015, and I had multiple interviews, which is the only reason I turned them down, and then I kind of still look back and feel bad about it. But you can kind of see that, like, I went through this as Dr. Sampson said he did, right, and looks at specifically what they're asking for, and I respond to each thing about what I have experience in. Right, and how, right? So when I'm writing my cover letter, I can say, okay, they're interested in literacy and TESOL. I did these things specifically, right? Minimum qualifications, PhD in literacy or TESOL. I have my PhD in this, right? I focus on these things. You can kind of read a little bit of my thinking there, because this strategy, right? This strategy of tailoring your materials, your interviews, your interactions to the place is really the difference of whether you're going to get a job or not. And having been on hiring committees, the candidates that have stood out to me were people who said, I want to be at this institution because, and had a reason. So to be able to say, you know, I want to be at St. John's because it's Vincentian mission, or because it's an online program that can reach, you know, to different corners of the world that other non-online programs can't. You know, this was a big reason why I wanted to be here, right? So anyway, I know that it is 8 o'clock, so thank you all for coming. I will be around to answer more questions, but I know many of you have to leave. Just as a reminder, on Saturday from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, I will be available. I'll probably send out an email soon to anybody who wants to come in and write. We're just going to have open writing time. I know Adele came, a few people came last time. Adele was one of them. We're just going to kind of write together. If you have questions, I have a breakout room to do mini conferences in. So if you want to talk about your writing, if you want to talk about your research, I'll be there to kind of bounce ideas off of. It's just open time, kind of no expectations, no program, just 1 to 4. We'll be there. If you have questions, email me. I can send you the link. Next week, we will be talking about kind of CV writing and cover letter writing and specific stuff about the job material. So today we took a big chunk of what does it look like to be on the job market? What are we looking for? Next week, we're going to get more narrow and workshop. Okay, how do we write a CV? What stuff should be included? How can we do things to enhance that CV? And then, of course, Jessica and Sheila are going to be in contact with you about that. So make sure that you fill out the attendance sheet so that we can make sure that we get you information from tonight, as well as kind of stuff ready for next week. Am I missing anything, Sheila, Jessica?
No, you're doing well. There's another minute left before. Got 1 more minute.
Okay, 1 more minute. So, okay. Any other questions?
Before we go, would you like for me to post in the link for the docs that you were just showing, or is that what Sheila just put in?
No, based off the attendance sheets, we'll send it to them, Jessica.
Okay. That works. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah, because there's the Google links to the, I guess it was your application and those materials that you so kindly shared with us that are really, really helpful. Should I go ahead and put that in here, the main one with the 3 different files in it, or just the one that was specific to the St. John's that you showed us?
I shared the here. I could post this in there, but Sheila, you can send it out too. I think I shared properly. The whole job searching folder. So the one with the 3 things. No, I'll do it. I think this is the right one.
Okay.
If not, Sheila can correct me, but let me just get this link and put it in there real quick. But Sheila and Jessica will follow up with you. Anyone can view. And again, just feel free to ask questions along the way, but I try to, oh, sorry, I sent that just to one person. Yeah, try to make sure that you have access to what you can. And again, Dr. Sampson's always here. If you have questions, I'm always here. If you have questions, our faculty are here for your success. Obviously, you know, we spend a lot of time making sure that our students are supported because we care about you, but also because we care about our program. And when we see you go out into the world and succeed, it does help us, right? It helps us in terms of, you know, of recruiting people and saying, look, we have so-and-so at such and such university, and we have so-and-so doing such and such, and we have so-and-so who's like the best teacher in New York City, right? So like, you know, we love it when you succeed, and we're here to support you. Again, we care about you, but we also, you know, do care about the program, right? And the integrity of the program. So yeah, so we're here for you.
Okay, we have till 8:30 actually. I'm sorry. If you have any other questions. I look forward to next week. That seemed to be a big one with the cover letters. And Dr. Sampson, thank you so much. Dr. J, I really look forward to seeing all the information need to go in the cover letters. And hopefully, and during this week, I'll just go online and just try to view different things and see and come back with questions for next week.
Excellent. Thanks for a wonderful job tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Both.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Ooh. Scared everybody away. Look at that.
Oh,
hi, you're still there.
I said we had to 8:30, but I guess that was.
Carol, like, no, we've had enough.
Dr. Joe.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I sent you a direct message in your chat just as an extension of what I'd asked earlier.